This evening, we are rather lucky to have a return engagement by Carla Gambescia, who is the author of a fascinating book called La Dolce University. We see it there on your screen, An Unconventional Guide to Italian Culture from A to Z, which is really a fascinating book. And she's also the creator of a website by the same name, which has this very interesting rubric of postcards from the boot. You can go to the website that you see there, ladolcevitau.com, and sign up for these really interesting lectures and postcards, images that Carla has put together through her travels across Italy. I just want to say that, I first heard Carla speak a couple of years ago, and I thought her presentation was the perfect balance between entertainment and enlightenment. And that's why we've asked her to come back. Last semester, we were sort of handicapped by what was going on. So we're very happy to have her here this evening. And the title of her talk is going to be about Italy's third golden age. So Carla Gambescia.
Thank you so much. And I want to say a special hello to my cousin Mark and Nancy, who are out there. I see you. Thank you for being here. I'm so happy. So anyway, okay, so this evening I'm going to be talking about Italy's third golden age. And the expression golden age conjures up several things for me. First, it conjures up a time, usually in the past, when all the planets seemed to align and some pinnacle of human achievement was attained. It also conjures a special sense of place, where it all happened. And finally, it also conjures up not just a major achievement, but also a major influence, and an influence that extends beyond its time and place of origin. By this standard, most countries have never had a golden age. A fortunate few have experienced one golden age, but I'm not sure that I can name a country that's had two, but I can name a country that's had three golden ages, and that's Italy. And Italy is unique in this regard. Italy's first two golden ages will be familiar to you. 2,000 years ago, Rome created an empire that dominated the Western world for an unprecedented 4 centuries. It was a triumph of military conquest for sure, and at its best, the Roman Empire was also a model of governance, one that would offer relative stability and security for individuals in an often brutal and tribalistic world. Rome held together its diverse territories by both creating the infrastructure and operating system, the hardware and software of a unified society. Roman engineering genius gave us bridges and paved roads and aqueducts to connect both people and life-giving resources. And importantly, the Romans built cities, creating a sense of local community and broader inclusion, and some of the longest lasting buildings from antiquity. And Roman law was the empire's operating system and was based on principles like the promises of citizenship, property rights, and protections under the law that would unite the largest citizenry the world had ever known. And Roman law proved influential in the formation of our own republics many centuries later. Italy's second golden age was the Renaissance, the 250-year creative flowering and intellectual transformation beginning in 15th century Florence after 1,000 years of widespread poverty punctuated with plague. And the Renaissance spawned not only timeless artistic treasures and scientific advances, but moreover, the appreciation of human agency that so informs our modern sense of ourselves. Now, and effectively passing and sharing the baton from God the Creator to man the Creator. Now, I'm going to introduce Italy's third golden age with a quiz. So for the last several years, US News and World Report has conducted its best countries survey, and it entails rating 80 different countries on 65 different attributes and by 20,000 adult respondents from all around the world. So which country do you think received the highest rating for has an influential culture? So of course, it's Italy, followed by China, Greece, and France. And then what about which country was rated as most fashionable? So again, it's Italy. And then check that out. Okay, so we have France, there you go. Okay, and what about great food? No surprise here, but what's really cool is that actually France was tied with Thailand in third place there. And then what about sexy? Yeah, so I'm faking you out there, Brazil. You know, who can compete with that? But Italy came in second, followed by Argentina, Thailand, and Spain. So if the same survey had been conducted 70 years ago, the answer to the first question might have been the same, but almost certainly it would not have been the same for the other questions. So what I want to do now is take a closer look at this unprecedented third golden age, which I call the golden age of beauty and pleasure. How did it come to pass? And just what does it tell us about today's Italy? Well, Italy was brought to its knees by World War II with massive destruction, abject poverty, ignominious defeat, and utter humiliation. But from the ashes of near annihilation, Italy would rise like a phoenix to its third golden age, one that would wow and win over a very different world. In less than 15 years after the war, Italy experienced an almost unimaginable image transformation, a miraculous makeover. In the early 40s, Italy was an Axis power and an enemy of the free world. Yet by the late 50s, Italy had become, in certain ways, the envy of the free world, a world dominated by those who had defeated Italy, and most especially by America. So how did this happen? Well, in a nutshell, or in a metal canister, it all began through the celluloid alchemy of the newly emerging international medium of film. If Italy had one consistent face between the two world wars, it unfortunately was this one. Mussolini was in power for more than 20 years, from 1922 until his arrest in July of 1943. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, scenes like this were distressingly common up and down the Italian peninsula. Yet, a mere 8 years after the last shells were fired, Hollywood stars could be seen on the American big screen, experiencing the joys of buzzing around the seven hills of Rome on a Vespa, licking gelato on the Spanish Steps, dancing in the moonlight beneath Castel Sant'Angelo. And a mere 7 years after that, in 1960, this iconic movie would come to symbolize the new Italy and the new Italian spirit that would enchant and captivate the world for years to come. So how exactly did the face of Italy morph from the face of Il Duce to La Dolce Vita in just 15 years? This happened, as I said, through the medium of film, but not just any kind of film. Italy's miraculous makeover began with the Italian invention of a totally new form of filmmaking, what became known as Neo-realism. Roberto Rossellini was the pioneer in neo-realist cinema, and he sold his bed to help finance Rome Open City, the 1945 breakout cinema sensation. And neo-realism provided an unadulterated window into the harsh realities of post-World War II Italy. Filmmakers hired ordinary, untrained people in secondary and even major roles to capture this sense of realism. And they didn't use sets, but instead they used real settings with real people in the background to further the effect. And themes focused on the reality of the times: poverty, classism, living under an authoritarian regime, and the effects of war on a post-war society. Rome, Open City depicted scenes of the Italian resistance during the Nazi occupation just the year before, in 1944. It was unstinting in its treatment of the horrors of war, and it featured scenes of torture, abuse, and violence, and a shocking execution in the final scene. The world and the world of film took notice. Rossellini's Rome, Open City received the grand prize at Cannes. And films like Vittorio De Sica's classic, The Bicycle Thief, in 1949 were about the struggles of ordinary Italians to maintain a shred of hope or dignity in the face of brutal poverty and bureaucratic indifference. And they struck an even deeper chord with audiences. So through these films and others, ordinary Italians will come to be seen less as wartime perpetrators of evil and more as victims of horrible circumstances and real people who were always credible, often resilient, and occasionally even heroic. First, they won our sympathy, and soon after, our admiration. And in a way, this was a necessary precondition for what would follow just a few years later, when Italy and Italians would come to represent a new way of living and a source of aspiration. In the early 50s, the Miracolo Economico had begun, and Italy was on its way to getting back economically, and Neo-realism wasn't the only show in town. Now, a condition of the Marshall Plan, okay, so Italians loved movies, and Hollywood really wanted to begin to show their films again in Italy. So one of the conditions of the Marshall Plan required that in order for American films to appear on Italian screens, all of the profits had to, from these movies would be reinvested in films produced in Italy. And the movie Roman Holiday, and then Three Coins in the Fountain, followed by other titles like Roman Adventure, Light in the Piazza, even Gidget Goes to Rome, were a result of the Marshall Plan. And these were really the movies that most shaped America's perception of Italy as the ultimate romantic setting. And so successful was this image makeover of war-ravaged Italy that Federico Fellini's movie, La Dolce Vita, became synonymous with its Sabiritic sounding title, in spite of its largely nihilistic content and its spiritually bereft protagonist. But many, many more Americans had seen Roman Holiday and Three Coins in a Fountain that had ever actually sat through La Dolce Vita. And practically everyone alive saw the image of Anita Ekberg and Marcello Mastroianni kissing in the Trevi Fountain. And as they say, the right picture is worth 1,000 tourist brochures. And in the process, the expression La Dolce Vita became the greatest advertising slogan for any nation in history. Now, I just want to say a few words about Fellini. This is the 100th anniversary of his death and his amazing contributions to Italian film, and more broadly, his influence on world cinema. His career arc was just stunning. He arrived in Rome. He was 19 years old in 1939 from Rimini, and he worked as a cartoonist, a journalist, or a writer of radio comedy, and then movie script writing and on-set apprenticeship. And he worked with Rossellini on Rome, Open City, and he was screenwriting then and was nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. But it was when he began to write and direct his own films in the 50s that he turned things inside out, or rather, I should say, outside in, from the neo-realist dictum of character determined by historic circumstances to character steered by, for better or worse, your own subjectivity. And it was this very subjectivity that led to dreamlike fantasies and surrealistic and often absurdist scenes that made Fellini not just a legend, but also an adjective. So like you look it up in the dictionary, Fellini-esque, okay? And there's something quintessentially Italian in Fellini's life as circus assortment of films, their subject matter, their soundtracks, and their style. And Fellini's enduring influence can be seen in the works of such diverse filmmakers as Stanley Kubrick, George Lucas, Woody Allen, David Lynch, Tim Burton, even Wes Anderson. And no surprise that the land of La Bella Figura has fashioned more Best Foreign Film winners at the Academy Awards than any other. And in the last 3 decades, the most memorable Best Foreign Film winners were mostly from Italy: The Great Beauty, Cinema Paradiso, Mediterraneo, Roberto Benigni's much-loved masterpiece, Life is Beautiful. So the humanity, the fantasy, and the visual style of modern Italian cinema would prove to be just the opening salvo for Italy's third golden age. So now I want to take a look at fashion and design. So Italy is the country that now most comes to mind for style or fashion. And that would have been the automatic answer during the Renaissance, when Florence and Venice were renowned for their fine fabrics, their skill of production, and their flair and beauty in styling. And these were the clothes worn by Isabella d'Este, the Jackie O of the Renaissance, and other Italian royals and tastemakers featured in paintings by Titian, Rubens, Raphael, and other artists. Now, Italy would never lose its reputation for the quality of its fabrics or its craftsmanship. But as the Renaissance receded, power shifted across Europe and taste began to change. And France would become the leader and indeed synonymous with the world of fashion. Italians were seen as the makers of clothing and the producers of fabric, while the French came to be seen as the designers of clothing and the final arbiters of fashion. And this would be the prevailing view from the Enlightenment through the first half of the 20th century. Italy would continue to hold its own with certain accessories, hats, leather goods, handbags, and shoes, but fashion was fundamentally a French thing, and no other nation came close. Now, that widespread perception began to change in the 50s, due largely to the determination and ingenuity of 2 particular Florentines. Now, the first was Giovanni Battista Giorgini, and he would light the fuse of Italy's fashion renaissance through his vision, his taste, and his promotional genius. He was born in 1898 to a patrician family whose wealth declined post-World War I. Giorgini began his career as a traveling salesman with an Italian ceramic export firm. And he had a really special nose for quality and an instinct for style. And he was a true believer and an advocate in Italian craftsmanship. So he went out on his own pretty shortly after he started, and he expanded his line and his clientele to include American department stores and specialty shops. And through his extensive travel within Italy, he became more and more convinced that the quality, the creativity, and the craft work of Italian clothing was unsurpassed. And then the seed of an idea was planted in his mind that perhaps there was an American market for Italian clothing, and one that fit with American tastes and lifestyles. And then in 1950, after failing to persuade B. Altman to showcase Italian couture, his Italian apparel idea began to more fully take shape. And he decided to stage his own Italian fashion event in Florence in his family home, the Villa Torrigiani. But to pull it off, he had to convince several renowned designers in Rome and Milan to participate, and a few emerging ones too. And at the same time, he needed to convince American buyers to attend his event on the heels of the big show in Paris. So overcoming suspicion and doubts on both sides, he made it happen in 1951, a seminal event that would put Italy back on the fashion map. Now, among the participating Italian designers were the Fontana sisters. These were three enterprising sisters from modest circumstances, but rich in the best dressmaking tradition. And their finely crafted and highly innovative apparel had already gained favor, not just with wealthy Romans, but also with a growing list of visiting American actresses. Actresses like Myrna Loy, Barbara Stanwyck, Ava Gardner, Audrey Hepburn, Grace Kelly, Elizabeth Taylor, Joan Fontaine, Rita Hayworth. And also participating was the designer and Duchess Simonetta Colonna di Cesaro, simply known as Simonetta. Simonetta's outfits were as fashionable as anything out of Paris, and they had their own style. They were fresh, they were feminine, they were modern, original, and somehow truly Italian. And they were just gorgeous. 7 other Italian couture designers exhibited their apparel in Giorgini's villa's library. And the couture show was a major success, with every Italian designer coming away with sales or a contract. In a marvelous piece of stagecraft that accommodated more designers and a larger audience of international buyers, Giorgini held the following year's show in the Pitti Palace, in the Sala Bianca, the white ballroom, okay? And of course, the Pitti Palace was the residence of the Medici family and is one of the most romantic settings in a city filled with romantic settings. And this would become the new venue for Italy's big fashion show, a show that would simply become known as the Sala Bianca. But back to Giorgini's original 1951 exhibition in his villa. Okay, so while Italian couture was an unqualified success, it was another of Giorgini's inspirations that made the event an even greater instant sensation. Now, Giorgini knew that Italy had a kind of ace in the hole. Italy was far ahead of Paris in daily clothing, categories like knitwear, sportswear, and lower cost designer lines, what we now know as ready-to-wear. Giorgini also had cleverly secured the presence of 4 of those designers, which he lumped together in what he called boutique fashion. And in a truly inspired gambit, he featured their clothing on the first day of the show. And the effect on American buyers was like palate cleansing after Paris, which only deigned to exhibit couture. And the design landscape would never be the same. Now, one of those 4 designers is our second heroic Florentine, someone who happened to also have a family palazzo of his own, the 12th Marchese di Barcento, also known as, Amelia Pucci. Now, Pucci once joked that he was the first member of his family to work in 1,000 years. And he worked as well as played, both to great effect, and was a true Renaissance man, not only in pedigree, but also in his output. And on the play side, he was a great sportsman: tennis, fencing, swimming, car racing, and skiing. He was a big skier, and he was on Italy's 1932 Olympic ski team. But Pucci was equally accomplished in a wide range of academic disciplines, studying business at the University of Milan, and then transferring in 1935 to the University of Georgia to study methods of textile production. And as the fates would have it, sanctions were placed on Italy for Mussolini's aggression in North Africa. And Italian nationals living abroad, like in America, like Pucci, found themselves financially cut off. But the Marchese still managed to get to the slopes and to Mount Hood in Oregon, where he just happened to meet the president of Reed College, and they struck a deal. In exchange for graduate school tuition, room, and board, Pucci agreed to coach the college's ski team. And he designed the ski team's uniforms, working with the Portland outdoor clothier White Stag. My first ski jacket was a White Stag. And he created the first recognizably modern ski wear. And after the war in Italy, he produced his first form-fitting line of ski wear commercially, forever changing how people would dress for winter sports. And then he did the same for summer, resort wear, designing shorts, tops, swimwear in playful cuts and bright colors. Really fun stuff. And this would lead to an even bigger line of apparel, including scarves and blouses and dresses, created first for his friend and department store magnate Stanley Marcus. Pucci was the first to create collections around a theme. So this was actually his Sicily theme. Then he did a theme based on Siena's Palio. And Pucci told the New York Times, quote, "We Italians have been very much shaped by America. After the war, there was a great hunger for color, for novelty and newness. And Pucci's eye candy creations would remain vital in influence into the psychedelic 60s and well beyond. His vision of leisure wear was completely in sync with the increasingly casual tenor of the times, and his works always exuded youthful energy, as it does even today. Now, while often emulated, Pucci's designs would remain recognizably his own, and not just because of his unrivaled eye, but also because Pucci was the very first designer to sign his garments on the outside. So he understood the value of branding. But before moving in beyond the 1950s, we need to recognize yet one more fashion shockwave coming out of Italy at that time. Now, if fashion had been mostly a French thing, it had also been a female thing. And Paris had all but ceded men's fashion to Savile Row in London. And they were purveyors, of course, of fine suits, but boxy suits with rigid lines and a limited color palette of materials, colors, and details. Suits that were meant to be, inconspicuous. So into the breach stepped Italian designers, most notably the House of Brioni, which in 1952 presented the first ever runway show of men's clothing with suits that were fluid and tapered rather than rigid and boxy. Suits that Marcello Mastroianni could be seen wearing on the big screen. They were elegant, relaxed, natural, and impeccably made. So not only Paris, but London was served notice. Less than 10 years after the war had ended, their days as the uncontested leaders in women's and men's fashion were numbered. And by the late 70s, the great fashion rivalry was less between Italy and France and more among the cities of Rome, Florence, and Milan. And in that rivalry, Milan's star was on the rise, having less to do with couture and more to do with ready-to-wear trends coming out of Milan. And one of the major players in the shift was this man, Giorgio Armani, whose relaxed yet elegant menswear collection in 1974 seemed to pick up right where Brioni left off. But it was Armani's women's collection the following year in 1975 that set heads turning. Recognizing that more and more women were joining the workforce, Armani's selection struck a resonant chord. And he said, and I quote, "I realized women did not have a way of dressing that was easy, modern, and somewhat close to a man's style, unquote. So his creations seem to accomplish the impossible. They were both feminist and feminine. And like all Italian apparel, they were designed not only with style, but also comfort and practicality in mind. They were meant to be worn. Here's how Armani put it, quote, high fashion for the wealthy and the very rich still exists, but the rule is that articles shown on the runway with just a few corrections and modifications must be capable of becoming clothes for everyone, unquote. So if Armani was the figurative heir to Brioni, his contemporary Gianni Versace might be thought of as the heir to Pucci. But Versace was very much his own man and obviously totally different from Armani, and a great example of the extraordinary bandwidth of Italians in all creative pursuits. While Armani's designs were modern and classic, Versace's featured a riot of colors and patterns, and Versace famously declared, and I quote, I don't believe in good taste. And it was said about the two that Armani dresses the wife and Versace dresses the mistress. And Versace was very proud of his Southern Italian roots and infused his designs with motifs inspired by Greco-Roman art. He was from Calabria. And you can see in the Versace logo, the Medusa head and the recurring motif of the Greek key. Now, these legendary Italian designers and their successors with their fluid form and capacious creativity all seem to make it look easy, which brings to mind a uniquely Italian term, sprezzatura, which sometimes translates to effortless mastery, effortless genius. But there was far more at work here. There's another expression that I think really better applies, and that is that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And time again, we hear about extraordinary, if unheralded forms of preparation by these and other geniuses and Italian geniuses. The Fontana sisters and Gianni Versace all apprenticed with their mother from the time they were like their earliest childhood. And Pucci studied textiles and patented his fabrics. And Armani spent 3 years as a medical student training that really clarified for him the relationship between anatomy and design. And he really had a nose for the times. You know, he was the first to understand that women needed clothes for work and men needed clothes for play. And so when it comes to fashion, Italy has shown the world that it can do it all. Women's, men's, work, play, formal, casual, refined, flamboyant, and do it with originality and genuine style. But what else would you expect from a country that's given you the expression la bella figura? So just as Italy's great artistic legacy translates painting, Italy's design legacy translates apparel. So we Italians know how to clothe themselves, but they care no less about the things they surround themselves with. And just as the French dominated fashion in recent centuries, it was also the perceptual leader in furnishings from Louis, the Sun King in the 17th century, straight through Art Nouveau and Art Deco movements of the 20th century. But furniture in recent decades has really, Italy has become the clear contemporary leader in furnishing designs and is #1 here, and even taking it beyond home furnishings. Olivetti, you know, Italians have been known for elegant problem solving, what is known as aesthetic pragmatism. When you think about aesthetic pragmatism, think about the beauty and utility of Roman arches. And so you see in functional objects, even in 1952, the Museum of modern art, staged an exhibition, Olivetti Design in Industry, and more recently, companies like Alessi has created some of the most iconic and practical gadgets for the kitchen and home. But one of the greatest examples of modern design engineering is a product intended for use outside the home. And that is, of course, the Vespa, okay? And introduced just after the end of the war, the Vespa both embodied and promoted the freedom and spirit of La Dolce Vita. And it's a great example of aesthetic pragmatism. So the problem here that needed to be solved was affordable transportation that would be easy to maneuver around Italy's bombed out cities. And believe it or not, the Vespa was inspired by military scooters that had been airdropped in by the Allies in 1944. And only in Italy could an ugly military vehicle be transformed into a cultural icon. And of course, sales of the Vespa soared after Gregory Peck took Audrey Hepburn on a spin in Roman Holiday. And that was probably one of the most notable product placements in movie history. And of course, there's the Vespa. And I just, I won't go into this, but we have the incomparable and indomitable Ferrari, and it's pretty amazing that it took not until 1984 that they did a model called the Testarossa. So we have one final frontier, which is food and wine. And so after the war, France had been the leading tastemaker, not only in such fields as fashion and furniture, but also those related to taste itself, the physical sense of taste. So France reigned supreme in cuisine, but that too would change. So I want you to consider these data points over time. After studying at the famous Cordon Bleu in Paris in the 50s, Julia Child wrote her best-selling cookbook, Mastering the Art of French Cooking. And that was in 1961. Her PBS show, The French Chef, would run from 1963 to 1973 and was all the rage. It was really the first cooking show. Now, growing up in a passionately Francophile household in the 60s and 70s, restaurateur legend Danny Meyer would spend part of 1984 as a kitchen intern, both in France and Italy, as preparation for his hospitality career. And in 1985, he opened his groundbreaking New York City Union Square Cafe. The menu ended up being eclectic, but it was advertised as American cuisine with an Italian soul. And then 25 years later, Esquire magazine true food and travel writer John Mariani published a book titled, ta-da, How Italian Food Conquered the World. And the conquest he chronicles was both popular and critical. Okay, so it took a bit longer, but Italy would topple France in the realm of food, just as it had in the world of design. However, it did not begin auspiciously. After the unification of Italy in 1861, King Emmanuel II held a state dinner, and the meal included some Italian dishes, but the menu was written entirely in French. Now, a century later, and an ocean away, while Julia Child was showing television audiences how to prepare a souffle, the same viewers could flip the channel and see and hear, uh-oh, SpaghettiOs, and come away with the impression that these heavily advertised and inexpensive canned products were what Italian cuisine was about. But then the tables would begin to turn. And it started with the surge of American tourism to Italy and the romantic allure of movies like Roman Holiday. And when Americans visited Italy, they went to trattorias and they found that there they could experience delicious food, fresh ingredients. This was not Chef Boyardee in a can, nor was it fussy, fancy French. It was delicious, satisfying food that people could imagine eating every day. Now, it makes sense sort of from a marketing point of view that the first restaurants, like high-end restaurants in Italian, featured cuisine from the North. And Northern Italian cuisine was both new to the American palate and was more refined than Italian fare. And this was a restaurant called Palio in New York City, run by Tony May. And actually, this kind of high-end cuisine was a great way to expand American palates and really challenge the perception of Italian fare being, spaghetti, and meatballs, because it's kind of like red sauce Italian. And Tony May became a culinary missionary at the high end and formed an association, that was really committed to creating a better understanding of authentic Italian cuisine and to enhance its image through education. And at a members' council, Tony May declared, "I want to shift attention away from pizza to white truffles, from spaghetti and meatballs to pappardelle alla lepre," which is, wild hare, from cheap table wines to Brunello di Montalcino. And that was 1980, and that was the time risotto became all the rage. And then next year, his association helped to build the Caterina de' Medici restaurant and teaching program at the CIA, Culinary Institute of America at Hyde Park. And it's interesting that, the fabled Napa Valley, the foodie and wine mecca, would come to be compared to Tuscany rather than Provence. And all of this was contemporaneous with America's growing interest in healthier food and fresh ingredients. And this was all the time of the food pyramid, which gave a green light to pasta lovers. And at the same time that the Mediterranean diet was really popular, and the Mediterranean diet officially anointed olive oil as the miracle ingredient. And this overwhelming popularity of olive oil would deal a body blow to classic French cuisine that was so heavily dependent on artery clogging butter. And just like Italian ready-to-wear fashion, a steaming plate of pasta was a far better fit with more casual lifestyles than classic French, which was too formal, too heavy, too serious, too fussy. And Nouvelle French was simply silly. And it's funny because today's farm to table movement inherently favors authentic Italian cooking with its emphasis on fresh local ingredients, all carefully but simply prepared. And if you were to ask any Italian chef worth their salt, farm to table is not a new idea. It's always been the essence and heart of authentic Italian cuisine. And most recently, there's been this interest in cucina povera, peasant cuisine, the poor cooking tradition from rural Italy, especially the South, and its waste nothing ethic has inspired cooks to great creativity, from items that we love like bruschetta, prosciutto, to pizza. Many of the most ingenious dishes that we love today were invented out of necessity by peasants over 100 years ago. And they simply made the most out of simple ingredients available. And then culinary innovation also took place at the lower end of Italian cuisine. So consider, pizza, okay? Pizza had its humble origins in Naples. And it's interesting because the way pizza began was it was a byproduct of dough being used, bread dough being used to gauge the temperature of an oven. Okay, so they didn't have a thermostat. So they put in, just to see just how hot the oven was, they put in, a little bit of bread, but you couldn't waste that. So, you had to eat it. But anyway, in the hands of creative geniuses like Wolfgang Puck and other forward-thinking establishments like California Pizza Kitchen or Mezzaluna, pizza acquired a new culinary cred. And just as French fashion had painted itself into an upscale, uptight corner, so had French cuisine. Not only did Italian offer something yummy for everyone, it was virtually impossible to tire of. But on every level, this accomplished something else, transforming food into fashion and into a lifestyle statement. Now, the culinary evangelist of a half a century ago was Julia Child. And today, of course, it is this woman, Lydia Bastianich, and her PBS show has gone strong for over 20 years. She's won several Emmy Awards, written dozens of cookbooks, including Mastering the Art of Italian Cooking, and has been inducted into the Culinary Hall of Fame. And in certain ways, the world finally caught up with and finally came around to embracing and falling in love with authentic Italian cuisine. Now, just 70 years ago, Italian wines were not even in the same ballpark, and they had some serious catching up to do. And only very, very briefly, I'll just highlight a couple of aspects of what only can be characterized as a total transformation of Italian winemaking. So Italian winemaking goes back 1,000 years, according to the legend. Dionysus, the god of wine, discovered the first grapevine in Sicily, and it was Pliny the Elder, the Roman scholar, who famously declared in vino veritas nearly 2,000 years ago. But the real truth was Italian wines had not been great for centuries, in spite of its truly great terroir. And in 1967, there was the 716-page New Encyclopedia of Wine and Spirits, and there were only 4.5 pages out of 716 that addressed Italian wines. Now today, virtually every wine anywhere in Italy, from Sicily to the Alps, is entirely different than it was 70 years ago. And many things have, contributed to this. First is the establishment of the DOC, which standardized winemaking and labeling, which had been wildly undisciplined and inconsistent. And it's probably the first time a government intervention has made a situation better. But anyway, in 1963, the Ministry of Agriculture introduced a classification system and created standards. And it created a floor, like a bottom, for quality control. But also it created a ceiling, on the more innovative end. And certainly rules have never stopped Italians, which led to the second big game changer, which was the creation of Super Tuscan wine. So the classification system regulated, Italian wines, but Super Tuscans come with the introduction of alien grapes. So grapes like from France. And so there aren't like DOC standards for any of these wines that, blend with French wines. And so then we had, the advent of the Sassicaia, the Tignanello, and these Super Tuscans. Everything has really changed. So, we've come this incredible long way. We have Tre Bicchieri wines that are on a par with French wines. And if you were to really ask, which is better, French or Italian, most would tell you it's a coin toss. But here's like a fun fact. Last year's list of top 100 bottles of wine from Wine Spectator magazine, 9 out of the top 25 were Italian labels. And they were the ones in first and third, including the ones in first and third position. And France came in second with 5. So that's the honest veritas. And so you can be the judge. So what do we conclude from all of this? Well, Italy's third golden age is very much with us today. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, Italy needed to rebuild its borders, and it also needed to rehabilitate its image with the rest of the world. And Italy accomplished that and so much more. Italy's miraculous makeover over these past 7 decades has won over the world in very major ways. But what sort of triumph was this? If Rome was a triumph of engineering and organizational genius, and Renaissance Florence was a triumph of creative and imaginative genius, Italy's third golden age was all of those things too, but with one added ingredient, specially tailored for modern times. And it was, and it is, a triumph of marketing genius. Our sense of Italy today, brand Italy, is a masterwork of lifestyle marketing. 2,000 years ago, Rome conquered a great swath of territory with its military might, not an option for the defeated post-war Italy. But times change. And one thing that hasn't changed is that throughout history, Italians have an innate ability to pivot and to adapt, even in the worst of circumstances. Italy and Italians always bounce back. Post-World War II Italy would never again conquer foreign lands by force as the Romans had, but instead they would conquer a different and more precious form of territory, that which lies between the ears and the chest cavity, the hearts and minds of the world. So this new conquest would not be one of brute force, but of the force of the power of attraction and persuasion. Today's Italy offers an alluring new vision of how to be in the world. Italians just seem to know how to live life, how to eat, how to drink, how to dress, and how to get about. And people the world over yearn to do it like Italians. So, mille grazie. And I just want to make some remarks about the current situation because I have every confidence that Italy will be back and be back strong. And Italy, I think in many ways has been a model of incredible spirit and heart in the face of great adversity from the times of the lockdowns where everywhere in Italy, people would either be singing to their neighbors, playing instruments, even falling in love across balconies and all the Andrà tutto bene signs that school children put up everywhere. I heard, actually, I had read about this in a UK paper, that there was a couple that met one another across the balcony and post-lockdown, like they met in person and now they're getting married. But anyway, Italy will be back, and I know that we all can't wait to be back there too. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions and whatever. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carla. If anyone has questions, they can jot them down into the chat where I have access to them. But Carl, I'm going to begin. We'll give a few minutes for people to send in their questions. I wanted to ask you about one topic that I was expecting and I was surprised not to see. What about Italians and, let's say, modern industrial design, cars, medical and dental equipment, things like that? You know, they've become very famous for like doing very precise work, not just like fancy romantic things like Formula One race cars, but even like very mundane things like dental and medical equipment. The Italians have a very high standard on those things, right?
Well, yes. Well, part of it was, I mean, it's kind of less sexy for a presentation. And I mean, the fascinating thing, and I mean, I think it's even something that needs to be have greater attention, you know, because people, we'd like more students to study Italian, and there's so many opportunities with, you know, in the sciences and technology, and this idea, you know, it's, you know, of course I'm focusing on like pretty things that I can do, like pretty slideshows, and whatever. But the most amazing thing, because I feel that this idea of aesthetic pragmatism, Italians, they don't just do pretty things, they solve problems. And there's just something innately practical and smart about like the Italian mind. And there's been incredible, greatness in the sciences, and, that whole area. I mean, and it's just, it's like I said, it's not, fun for a slideshow, but it's something that I wish there was broader awareness of it, because it's like, oh, well, they paint, they do, clothes, whatever, shoes, whatever. And there's a whole host of things that, again, the capaciousness of Italian creativity and problem solving, it's amazing. And I wish that there was greater awareness of it, but it's mostly because I couldn't make pretty slides,
No, but could you go back one slide? I'd like to point out an image. You see this image? No, the image of them having the brindisi on the balconies. I remember this in the springtime at the apex of the pandemic in the north of Italy. And I just wanted to point this out because one of the underlying philosophies of your talk is that the Italians have this marvelous ability to improvise when it's necessary.
Yes, they do.
In a country that doesn't really have the wealth of natural resources that like we have in the United States or other countries might have, they've had to spend the last 2,000 years trying to figure things out. In Italy, it's called l'arte di arrangiarsi, the art of systematizing yourself, of arranging things. And this image, I remember in the spring of the people, having Prosecco, before dinner in the middle of the pandemic, really reminded me of that kind of cultural trait that the Italians have. And of course, it goes into everything that you talked about, into the fashion, into the films. How do you make a film in Rome in 1945 when there's no film stock? How do you make a film when there are no actors? Well, you use people in the streets, How do you make fashion out of what you have? Well, we have silk, so let's make dresses out of silk. So this is like, I think, part of the Italian genius in the 20th century.
Yeah, and of course you've heard my first talk, Alchemy of Italy, and it's so my book, I just want to mention this because it's these 165 mini essays about food, wine, art, history, whatever, and they're organized. The chapters are letters of the alphabet, and I have an essay under the letter A about arrangiarsi, and that just really being part of cultural DNA. And that's, again, part of this, like, aesthetic pragmatism, whatever. They just, and it's not just like simply being like aesthetic for the sake of being aesthetic, form with function, all of those sorts of things. Right. Yeah.
So I don't see any questions in the chat, but maybe we can discuss something else. You had mentioned in one of the earlier slides this idea of sprezzatura, the idea of the skill of making something difficult look effortless.
Yeah.
And I'm always fascinated by this because in order for Italians to, really succeed in all of these fields, and I see you had some slides of the cars. My internet connection went out for 10 minutes in the middle of your talk, so I apologize if I missed something. The idea of sprezzatura, is to take something that is inherently very difficult and make it seem effortless. But that can't be done unless you have this incredible kind of self-discipline. And one of the things that I always found interesting was that this contradicted the kind of stereotype of Italians as being anarchic, as being disorganized, as being a chaotic country. You cannot create clothes like this or cars like that or design like, the jewelry and all of that, or reform the wine industry without incredible sense of self-discipline. And that's one thing that I think is oftentimes overlooked. The Germans get all the credit for being so self-disciplined, but you cannot produce culture like this, and especially this idea of sprezzatura without this incredible self-discipline.
Well, one of the things you must have missed this is this was an amazing thing that I hadn't realized. But Giorgio Armani had actually gone to medical school for 3 years. And so, you know, his clothes just lay on the body so perfectly. And, you know, he understood the relationship between, you know, anatomy and design. And that's partly, you know, and it's just, well, his stuff's just like, so like, how's that work? But, you know, these are things that, you know, these like the idea of like the whatever 10,000 hours of practice or whatever. And, you know, there's a lot of things that you just think, oh, well, that they just kind of did it. But no, you know, and they work really hard and there's a lot behind things. Or somebody like Versace, you know, he was sewing with his mother, he's 3 years old, you know, and so it doesn't just like necessarily come out of the blue, like, oh, I had like the light bulb goes off, right?
Right. And one of the things that's oftentimes pointed out in these fields like high fashion or food is the very intimate connection between the workers and the artists. In other words, there is not the artificial distinction between artisan and artist. So like if you're going to be, let's say, Giorgio Armani, the way to do it is you start in the tailor shop when you're 5 years old, you know, doing the most basic things. If you're going to do a vineyard, you start by harvesting the grapes, you know, and that's how you go through the ranks. There is a question here from Deborah Lambert. She wants to know about the background. Is that the Galleria in Naples or in Milan?
It's in Milan.
It's in Milan. Okay.
My fashion thing. Yeah. So yeah. So anyway, yeah.
So any other questions from our audience? You can just drop them into the chat.
I just wanted to, I'll put my website up.
Oh, so you did have the Vespa and the Ferrari. I missed that. I apologize. I missed 10 minutes. I lost the computer connection. Yeah.
The Vespa is this amazing, you know, that's definitely aesthetic pragmatism. And it was interesting because Piaggio, he had a factory that did airplane engines, okay? And it got bombed in the war and he just decided, well, I'm going to shift off to like something. And he understood that what was really needed was affordable transportation around bombed out cities. And he saw these little military vehicles. And then he assigned an aeronautics engineer, because that's who like worked for him, to come up with the Vespa. And so you have this little like sharp little thing. Right? So it's
one of which is in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City.
Right, absolutely. Because and then that's an amazing example of, you know, form follows function. Yeah. So yeah. So here we go. Here we go. Yeah. So I enjoyed giving this. It's just like it's funny because we always think about culture like in the distant past, and you know, Italians are amazing today and inspiring on so many levels. So. Oh, and you know, it's an interesting thing. I just want to share this because we're around Jarsi. I happen to know I have some friends who are very, you know, they're Venetian and they, you know, I was talking about how Venice in many respects is a great example of something that was out of Aranjarsi. Like, how do you build a great republic from, you know, here, you're escaping to an island, you know, a marshy island with seabirds, and you build a great republic. How did they figure that out? If that isn't Aranjarsi, like what is, right? Anyway, but we could take offense at that. That's like a Southern thing, Aranjarsi. Yeah. So I'm like from the South, so I don't take offense. So. Yeah.
So anyway, folks, there you see Carla's website, ladolcevitau.com. I really highly recommend her book. It is really entertaining and enlightening at the same time. And all of the postcards from the boot, which are so beautifully put together. So thank you, Carla. It was really wonderful. We hope to have you back. Last round for any questions, comments. Trabocchi. Oh, yeah. Another night then. Okay. So on behalf of Hofstra University and the Cultural Center, Carla Gambescia, thank you very much For everyone who attended, thank you. Please be in touch with us. Be safe, be well to all you and all your families. Have a good Thanksgiving and holiday season, and we'll be back in the spring. Okay? Ciao, ciao.